Hey, welcome back to the Invigorate podcast. We're happy to have you here today. I'm Karin Wagner, and I'm here with my awesome, fantastic co-host, Baddest Chaplain Chris Burton.
What's happening, y'all?
On the Invigorate podcast, Chris and I talk about all the ins and outs of autoimmune diseases, and more importantly, just the reality of living with a chronic illness day in and day out.
Today, we're going to be discussing the long game, thinking about your long-term plan, mentally, your mindset, dealing with an indefinite chronic illness. Like, what does it look like to know that this is something that currently doesn't have a cure, something I'm going to have to manage and maintain for my whole life, and still maintaining a good quality of life? That's going to be our challenge today for sure.
Yeah. So the one aspect of this is that it is the long game. There is no cure. It is what it is. But with these autoimmune diseases, symptoms can come and go.
Mm-hmm.
And flares can also come and go. And what
Right.
a flare means to one person might mean something different to someone else.
Truly.
For me, on a day-to-day basis, every once in a while I'll have a little joint pain here, another ache there, but it comes and goes and it's not bothersome. But then there's other times where I'm in more of a short-term flare. I would say it could be a day or two to a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But then on the other end of the spectrum, and this doesn't happen to everyone, but I've experienced it a couple of times, is that you're in it for weeks, months, and maybe even a year or more.
I've heard of that too. Definitely heard of that.
And I think that's why, and when you're in the thick of it in month after month and ailments aren't getting better, or they are getting better, but it's slow, it takes a mental strength and stamina to get through that. And I think that's why today's conversation is so important, because I think prepared going into it is vital. But when I experienced my situation, I wasn't prepared for that.
Right. Which I think is a common thing. I don't think most people go into it necessarily saying like, oh, like I know exactly what to expect, especially if it's like, early in their journey, or this is their first flare of some sort. Yeah, I think it blindsides most people,
Yeah, and just when the inexperience of not having gone through so much of it early on, it can take you by surprise, and how intense and long lasting sometimes these can last.
Absolutely. Just and just like how much it can just wear a person down, because I think outside of chronic illness, there is that expected end date of, let's say you have a cold or even something serious like, oh, I have the flu. Okay, for X number of time, you're going to experience the worst of it, but you're going to get better. But if it's something where, you're in a flare that's lasting months up to a year, that's a long time of just every day not feeling great. That can really wear you down mentally.
Yeah. Chris, what's been like the longest or kind of most intense flare that you've gone through that's really challenged you mentally?
Yeah, I would say the second major flare I had was worse because, number one, it was when I had children. Like, my mindset when I had like my first flare was, it'll be okay, right? Like it'll be fine. If this affects my quality of life, I'll just find a way to just get through it, And I felt bad because I was a newlywed. And I was like, this really stinks for my wife. Like, you say your vows, but you don't think you're going to cash in so early. Like you mean what you're saying, but you think like, yeah, like 50 years from now, like at some point that this will be.
I thought the sickness was supposed to come at the end of the storyline.
Right, exactly. Not the first chapter, and so you definitely, I felt bad about that. But when I had kids, like my second flare up, I was in the hospital, and I remember my whole goal in the hospital was to just get out in time for my son's first birthday, which I ended up not being able to celebrate with him because I was in the hospital, right? So just feeling that mental strain of just seeing all these different sort of, I guess I call them like holidays or landmarks. Like I was like, okay, well, maybe we can get out in time for Thanksgiving. That didn't happen. Maybe we can get out in time for my son's birthday. That didn't happen. And it was like his christening was supposed to happen. That didn't happen. Like all these different things we had planned for that fall that we ended up having to just push to the side because what would you be able to do? Like I probably annoyed my medical staff just being like, it's today the day I get out. They're like, no, like you are not ready to go. You cannot go outside in freezing conditions in your condition, So it definitely weighed on me mentally. It was a long period of time. I don't think it was longer than the first one, but just because of what felt at stake at the time in terms of these, special occasions for my family that I did not want to miss out. And I'm sure I'm forgetting even more of it, but just like that day to day of just seeing, at that point we had 2 kids under 2 years old. So just that day to day of seeing your kids at such a young age is very, very hard. It's extremely hard.
For either of, it sounds like for one of them, but for both of them, did you know that it was going to be a long-term thing, or were you just really like, okay, today's the day or tomorrow's the day I'm going to be better?
I think the first one definitely caught me by surprise in terms of how long. I mean, obviously I didn't know I had a disease. I thought I just was not feeling well, and I remember because essentially my body was breaking down over the course of a year that it just felt like, wow, like this new problem. That's what it felt like with the first flare. But the second flare, because I had the experience of knowing what a flare was, I still didn't want to embrace that it was a flare. I remember, I love that you asked me this because I remember vividly, I was a school teacher and I said to my one of my good friends at work, who I was a special ed teacher, he was the general ed teacher, and I was saying to him, it's like September 4th or something, like early in the school year, and I was like, man, I feel like I just need the whole year off. And I know that, as school teachers, it's a common thing to sort of start counting down to June in September. That's not uncommon. But in this case, I was like, no, for real, I really don't know how I'm going to get to October, much less to June. And he just looked at me like, what are you going to do? Because it just seemed impossible, what I was saying. I do not feel great at all. Like, you're not, in my brain, I was saying, you're not supposed to be this tired this early in the school.
And you really attribute it to just being tired. You just didn't know what was happening at that time?
I think I knew, but I didn't want to fully accept.
Sure.
I think I knew that it was lupus related, definitely, but I didn't want to accept that it was, because something about, like, I don't know, this is going to seem silly, but it's kind of like, have you ever been on a road trip and you're like, I think I have to use the bathroom, but you don't want to tell yourself or even say aloud to anyone in the car, I have to use the bathroom, because you haven't seen any rest stop signs. And you're like, if I acknowledge that I have to use the bathroom, I'm going to go, my body's going to panic because I haven't seen any rest stop signs and this is not good. No. We just got to pretend it's not happening. I think this is a far more dramatic version of not seeing a rest stop sign,
Well, and you can ignore it for so long, but eventually you have to stop. So what happened where you got to that point where you didn't have a choice anymore?
Oh gosh. So for me, it was, I had this awful condition called, like, I want to get it right. Someone's gonna comment like, you pronounced it wrong. I think it's called like hydranus suppurativa or something like that.
Okay.
And it's awful. It's basically how it arrived in my life was my armpit started to burn, like, bad.
Oh.
Like my body was just like, it felt like someone like stung me or something. And I was like, this feels bad. And then it started to smell. And not just like BO, but like dying. It smelled awful. It was something where I was like, I'm, clean, hygienic, and still no change. Weird. So I remember going to the emergency room, and the emergency room doctor was pretty much like, yeah, I don't know what this is. I think in their mind, if you weren't like bleeding out or saying like, clutching your chest or something, they're like, I don't know. You like take an antibiotic or something. And then I went to another hospital where I was treated very. It actually made my wife and I cry because the gentleman, I think he was like I forget his position, so I don't want to put it out there like make it seem like the whole occupation is bad, but he essentially was very dismissive of it and looked at me like, I don't know why you're here for this. Like, you could go to work tomorrow. Like, you're fine. And I was like, clearly I'm not fine. And I was confirmed that I went to a third doctor because I'd gone to my primary care doctor and they gave me the referral to that awful doctor. And the third hospital I went to, by the time the surgeon at this point walks into the room, they're like, you're not going home tonight. We're prepping you for surgery tomorrow. Because they essentially had to remove tissue from the armpit. So the way I've understood it is that it was a part of my body's attacking of itself that was happening with this flare. So my body
Okay.
was just like, so in this flare, part of it was that my whole body was just like breaking down. I don't know if decomposing sounds too graphic, but essentially like you just falling, like really falling apart, not just like metaphorically falling apart. And so, gosh, it just was such a undeniable thing that I could no longer say like, well, maybe this is, maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I need to get more sleep. Like, you couldn't do that when a surgeon's telling you you're not going home tonight. We're prepping you for surgery tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Yeah, how scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Sobering. Very, very sobering.
Yeah, when you get that life altering situation, nothing sobers you up faster.
Yeah, I'm telling you. I am telling you. And what's so amazing about it in a way, Karen, is whatever else was on your to-do list, like if I was thinking, oh, I need to call the cable company, and oh, we're out of grapes, we need to get grapes, like all that to-do list just goes away immediately because you realize like, oh, I'm not going to get a chance to do any of those regular life things now, maybe not for a while. And so you just kind of immediately go into another zone. And for me, every hospitalization I've had has just felt like, okay, how are we going to survive this day? How are we going to survive the next day? That's where my mind goes immediately.
You bring up a really important point because there's that point where you're hit with whatever unexpected news or situation that you have to deal with. And there's the original shock, scariness. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're in this right now. But then you get through the surgery or whatever the hiccup is for that's too late of a term to use.
Right.
But you get to the other side of it and then you see the long road to recovery. If at all, do you even know there's an end game to full on recovery? When you're in that point, it can be scary to look ahead and try and take it the next step because you just don't know where you're going to go or where you're going to end up.
Yeah. And especially because there's something about severe flares, especially that feel, I mean, because they're life threatening. When you're out of it, and you're on the other side of it. In many ways, it feels like a complete reboot because for me, I think about that first flare. It changed the literal texture of my hair. It was like the hair texture I had at the end of the flare looked like my baby picture hair because which is adorable, right? Like, but I was like, I've never had this hair, as like a conscious adult. I don't know how to like style it or anything like that. And then I remember, with the second flare, I had a visiting nurse come by and try to rehab me for, I think the insurance ended up covering like 3 visits, so something very minimal. But I remember them saying to me, Mr. Burton, you have the strength of an 80-year-old man right now. And they had the test where I put my arm up, and I'm trying to get on the camera to put my arm up. Yeah, put my arm up. Here we go. I put my arm up, and and she would just like slap it down to show like how like weak I was. I couldn't hold my arm up, and I just remember thinking at that point, like, I have 2 kids. I have 2 boys who are going to want to wrestle and play and jump around. Like the older one, especially, was already demonstrating how much he loved to like wrestle and be active. Like, how am I going to do this? Am I going to have to just sit and watch them play? Are we like? Did I just get that small of a window? And with the younger son, no window to wrestle and play and enjoy that sort of father son bond. Like they both, in terms of the flares, both brought me to very like existential places of like, how can I still be, myself? Like the first one was like, how can I be a husband? Now it's like, how can I be a father? Like, what does that mean in this capacity?
That is so important because for me, and I think a lot of people, especially when you're hit with something so unexpected,
Yeah.
you tend to jump ahead and are worrying about the future, or what's next, or just keeping up with life. And that in itself can feel so daunting and
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, which I think is absolutely key, is focusing on the here and now. Okay, I have this moment. What can I do in this body, this situation at this time
Mm-hmm.
to just enjoy my life, whether it's just being present with your kids or working to do something more. I don't know,
Yeah.
meditating or physical therapy.
Right. Just improving the overall quality of your life. Like it's really, to your point, Karen. It's so, I can't emphasize this enough, how flares make every single aspect of your life more difficult. If you were someone who was active, you're robbed of that. If you're someone who wasn't that active, everyday tasks are going to be so much harder, like washing the dishes or walking up the stairs, opening a jar of pickles. Like, just regular things can feel so insurmountable. So it's really, I think, super important to do the work with the mind and mental health and the life of the mind, because it's so trying and it's so difficult that if you aren't doing that work, it's just easy to break all the way down, because these are such insurmountable odds.
Yeah. And I will say my second major flare, I was not in a good place mentally,
Yeah.
stressed out from work,
Uh-huh.
overly tired. I had
Right.
2 young boys at the time too. So
Mm-hmm.
just stretched way too thin.
Yeah.
And because of that, going into the flare and being in the hospital, like I was just kind of a mess. It was
Yeah.
doom and gloom. But when when you are stuck in that hospital bed, you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned bugging your nurses every day
Oh gosh,
wanting
yes.
to go.
Shout out to them. Thank you, Brooklyn Hospital nursing staff. Y'all are the best. Thank you.
For real though, it's like you cannot wait to get out of there. But when you are basically you're stuck in that hospital room, it really gave me an opportunity to look within and figure out, okay, how am I now? How can I get through this moment? Because that clock is not ticking any faster and this bed is
Mm-hmm.
not going anywhere. So I mentally have to figure out how to deal with this right now.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, my mental health is so tied to my spiritual practices. So I would wake up, and I laugh about it now, because I've always joked, my wife and I have always joked that, had we not met each other, we would have gone into like monastic lifestyles. Like, I would have been a monk and she would have been a nun somewhere. And so being in the hospital really allowed me to kind of just like visit my monastic practices. So I would get up with the sun, or, and as it was becoming shorter days, I'd wake up like 6 o'clock every day. And I would wake up and I would like sing first thing in the morning, and I would like read scripture and I'd pray, and I would just like try to think of things to be grateful for. Mind you, in a hospital bed, there's very little going on right now that's like, oh, this makes me happy. You know what I mean? But I would try to really focus on things that inspired gratitude, what my goal was for the day in terms of like what I needed to do, right? So it could be something very fundamental. Like, today, I'm going to walk to the bathroom unassisted. Or today, I'm going to sit up in the bed. You know what I mean? Like very basic things, but at the time are huge accomplishments to be able to get through with them. So just thinking about just the human need for goals, the human need for accomplishment, not to just be like, obviously I wasn't like writing a Facebook post like, oh, I walked down the hallway by myself. Like it's not like I need recognition from anyone else, but for me, I needed to know that, you know, that hospital bed wasn't going to be like, you know, all that I could do that day. Like I had to, and sometimes it would get me in trouble, to be honest with you, Karen. Like I remember my first hospital stay, for some reason, I thought it was smart to jog in place with like all the different like heart monitor things on. So I remember my nurse running in there because they see everything spiking up and just thinking like, oh no, this man, like we're about to lose him. I'm just there like happy jogging. They're like, Mr. Burton, please lay down. Like right now. Like what are you doing? But I just did not want to accept this whole notion, especially with that first flare. I didn't want to accept the notion that I was sick. It was just the hardest thing in the world for me was to like admit it to myself that I wasn't feeling well, you know?
Yeah. Well, and usually, the first go around and being younger, you tend to be a little bit just more inexperienced.
Yes. It's a very kind way to say it.
Yeah, just same way.
That's right.
Yeah. But I do think you bring up a good idea and point to share that whether you're in the hospital or just regular day to day,
yeah,
giving yourself those minor goals gives you intention and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the hospital and elsewhere, it's like, oh, you can see little progress that you're making, even if it is just walking down the hallway.
Yeah.
It's still progress and you're still getting better. And I think celebrating those small wins is so key in getting through those long-term flares or challenges.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. You have to give yourself something to work toward. And I think it really connects to just the essential nature of hope, right? Like I think about, I forget what religion or practice it is, but it talks about essentially like on the day of like, you know, the end of the world, that you should still plant a tree, like something to that effect. I'm butchering this like wisdom, but it's a whole sense of what it looks like to really create hope as a discipline. I think that's something that's essential, especially for those of us who you know are facing these insurmountable odds of hospitalization and chronic illness. You know.
I even have my hope sign in the background.
Oh yeah, see, there we go.
So hope was something I struggled with for a while. It's like, this is never ending. Especially when I was having a hard time for a couple of years, I just could not see the end. Was trouble seeing any sort of light. Yeah. But when you have those times and you start writing down what you're thankful for, especially when you're in a hospital bed and it doesn't seem like there's a lot to be thankful for.
Come on, right.
Well, it definitely helps you improve that practice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a really good place to start, by simply writing down. And the act of writing actually helps you process and think through it.
Absolutely.
But just then by opening it up, you're automatically kind of receiving that gratitude of, hey, you have another day, you have this time. And whether it might not look physically the way you want it, you're still there and able to be present.
Yeah.
I remember so many times after my surgeries, like I would just be sitting on the floor with my boys and they would be crawling around, like across my cast on my legs. Like,
right.
But I was there, you know? Yeah. They don't remember that I wasn't throwing balls with them.
Right. The presence was enough.
So I think making sure that you are, for me, it was making sure that I'm focused on like the here and now, and then what I can do to make it better. It's just it can be so wearing when you are in it for months at a time.
No
So making
question.
sure you find those bright lights in between is so important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. Absolutely.
Chris, how did you in those times? So the first flare, it was you and your wife,
Mhm.
but the second flare, it was you and your family. How would you say you presented or showed up for your family? Like, were you always positive? Did you feel like you always needed to be positive? What was your mindset?
I tried to be positive, particularly for the kids. Like I remember a really difficult day where my wife, because she was amazing, and it was it felt like she was there every day, all the time, right? Like obviously it was not physically possible for her to be there 24 hours or something like that, but it felt like she was there often. And I remember saying to her one day, I, I'm just so tired. Like I want to be here, but I'm just so tired. And it was hard because you are going through something and you need to be honest, right? Like we talk about that whole sense of me not wanting to accept it, but it was also really hard to be honest with people about how awful it was because I could see how much it devastated them. Particularly thinking about my wife, but also like friends came by, other family members. When I talked about exactly how I felt, like I remember after that first flare, a friend of mine who I was telling him about the diagnosis and he just refused to accept it. He just would not believe it. And was angry, almost angry with me about me saying, you know, it matter of factly. He just could not receive it at all. And what I noticed with the second flare with my children, my oldest son, he had, if memory serves me right, um, just turned 2, getting ready to turn 3. It was like 2.5, and so obviously nowhere near a space where he's able to like process something like a hospital or daddy is sick or anything like that. And I just remember him being so frustrated that this is after the hospital. When we went to like my aunt's house, I remember he just would like hug me and then just start crying and then just like punch me in my arm with all his little like 2.5-year-old strength, like just like really frustrated by what's going on. I just let him just like punch it out of my arm. Thankfully, he didn't injure me because I was that weak. But just trying to, as best as I could with the resources I had at the time, to be present. So more than just trying to, I mean, I'm sure I said things like it's okay or what have you, but I think it was just more important to just be present. Um, and especially at a time where I felt and assumed it seemed like I was just ripped away from them, you know?
We've been talking a lot about what's internally going on in our minds, but thinking about how others are processing it.
Yeah.
I think it's important to give them the space to be able to process it the way they can. Your little
Yeah.
2-year-old guy, he's just frustrated.
Yeah.
But then your other friend is frustrated because he can't accept it or can't deal with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think everyone deals and copes with these things in their own way, but
No doubt.
being honest and giving them space to deal with it in whatever way is, I mean, the way through it. They'll
100%.
either eventually accept it and you guys can move on or not, you either
Yeah.
grow or you don't. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Because I've come to truly believe that as awful as it is to experience it, it is uniquely terrible to watch someone you care about go through, you know, illness. It is just there's a that sort of like agency that I talked about with getting up early and setting goals and all that. Like you don't have that when you're watching someone you love or someone you care about go through an illness. There's no sense of like, here's what I'm gonna do to like, make sure they're better. you you feel powerless, and that can manifest itself. Those emotions from my oldest son were some of the most honest emotions you can have, right? It's the sense of I just need to punch something, I just need to like scream or whatever it is, because you're powerless.
Yeah, it doesn't get rawer than that.
No, it sure doesn't. It sure doesn't.
Looking back through both flares and just the intensity, and one with your wife and the other with your kids, for someone who hasn't gone through something like this, what would you recommend to them to kind of mentally prepare for the long haul?
To really work on your patience. Because, and it's funny, even within like the Christian spaces I frequent, people will say things like, don't pray for patience, right? Because if you pray for patience, you're going to be put in like difficult situations in life. But at the same time, it's a part of your resilience as a person, right? Like we've seen people who've like just snapped because of traffic, right? Like people who've just been mad that there's just like other people trying to get home at the same time as them, right? Like people who just can't deal with it. And so I think patience is critical because you need the resilience to say, if things don't go my way, like precisely how I wanted it to go, right? Like we had plans for my youngest son's first birthday. It was going to be a fun party. I'm sure we had a theme for it. I don't remember right now. Maybe like puppy dog pals or something, right? Like it was going to be a great theme. And that plan could not have been realized because of the circumstances. So we just could not do it. And if you're someone who's so set in your ways that things have to go the exact way you think about it, you're too brittle. I think all of us are somewhat like bridges where, if you're too brittle and you don't have any room to sway, you just crack and fall into the river. But you have to be built with a little bit of give, a little bit of adaptability in your structure. And I think that's what helps you weather the storms of life, is not being so rigid and so brittle and so set on my way or the highway. Because the honest assessment of things is that we are not that much in control. And we have to be willing to acknowledge that and to sort of say, okay, now that I realize I can't control every single aspect and detail of my life, what's next? How are we going to do this? And I think patience is a key instrument in figuring out how to live,
I love that. As a recovering control freak, I definitely was too structured, especially climbing the corporate ladder,
Oh, for sure. Right, right.
and I broke. I will say that's ultimately what put me into my second flare.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It was just, I was too intense, too hard on myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I just didn't give myself enough patience and space to really take care of myself and
That's
accept
real.
it.
That's real. That's so real.
One thing that I don't know if it's a specific quote or not, but the general idea to help me shift from that is, now I try and focus on the why and the who. Why am I doing it? Who am I
Right,
doing it for?
right.
Versus the what and the how.
Yes, yes, yes.
Because we don't have control over the what and the how. God
No.
will decide that for us, or
Right.
the universe, whatever you want to believe in. But it's by focusing on what's actually important, the
Mhm.
rest will fall in place. And that has helped me focus on like the now. And I don't need a 10-page plan. I can just focus on what I need in this moment today.
Yeah, yeah. And it's such a healthier way of living. I think it's just you exhaust yourself trying to live into every single detail of your master plan for your life every day. It just feels so exhausting. Rather than saying, okay, today is Wednesday. Let me see what we can do. And today is Friday. What can we do? Today is Monday. To just go through it and just say, like you're treating your life like it's a series of dominoes. That just feels extremely stressful. You know, like
It is
it's not that
stressful.
precise. It can't be that precise.
What else would you say to anyone who is in the thick of it right now and they're saying, okay, you're going to tell me I have to get thinking and take it one step at a time?
Yeah. Ultimately, be kind to yourself. I very much do believe that what we think about ourselves affects our health, and what we say to ourselves affects our health. Um, if you're someone who is very like, just really pay attention to the voice in which you speak to yourself. Is it a loving voice? Is it a frustrated voice? Is it an angry voice? And if it's not a loving voice, take the time to interrogate that. You know, why am I so angry with myself? What makes me so afraid? What makes me so frustrated? Slow down and spend time with yourself. Don't be someone who blots out your own voice with just like sensory overload. Like you're always on your phone, you're always watching a TV show, you're always playing loud music, you're always doing something. No, spend time in that stillness to really figure out, why is it so hard for me to be loving towards myself? You know, I think that's a really important step, because if you have that sense of love for yourself, it's going to spill out and allow you to be loving to other people. But for the intents and purposes of getting through a hospitalization or just a difficult downturn in health, it's going to be what you need to remind yourself and encourage yourself that you can get through today. You know, that you can get through today. And I think you can't really do that sense of encouragement and self encouragement if you don't have a love or a respect for yourself.
For sure. And for me, it took that intense long flare to really look within and do that work. So my tip, and if you're smarter than I am, would be to do it before you find yourself in that intense situation.
For real,
But
right?
if you are like me and you find yourself there, I mean, that's a perfect opportunity. Hey, you're tied down and you're not operating at 100%. Use this time to reflect and do what you can
Mm-hmm.
mentally to set yourself up better for when you are back on your feet and more recovered.
Agreed. Totally agreed.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and stories today. I think this is what really makes these autoimmune diseases real.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I first talked to you, I was like, I could tell this guy is a good guy. And it's like, you just have that when you go through hard things and experience life the way we have,
Right.
you come out just a more empathetic person.
Yeah.
And I could just tell right off the bat that it's just, there's nothing but positive vibes. And I so appreciate that.
Oh no, thank you. Well, the feeling's mutual. I think to your point, it has to deepen your well of empathy. But I could also see how, and I think there was moments in the journey where I had to fight the temptation to feel this way, where you can kind of start to feel like the star of the show, right? Like you're surprised that everyone is still living life because you have been in the hospital. Like, what do you mean? They continued the playoff game and Congress is open. Like, what do you mean? Like, I've been sick, so I think there is a part of it that can kind of lend itself to turning yourself into the star on the Christmas tree, so to speak. But I think ultimately, if you're really doing the work, it will, to your point, deepen your well of empathy. You know,
For sure.
it's a joy. I think it's important uh, for folks to consider, and I just want to thank everyone for listening and being here with us. You know, I think it's a beautiful thing.
Encourage them to check out the earlier episode where we talked about the actual tactical tools and tips to get through a flare.
Right, right.
But then I'd also encourage you to check out invigorateyourjourney.com and the mental health resources on that site. We give you resources and tools to help you do some of that internal work and help get your mindset right.
Absolutely, absolutely. And know that you can watch us, listen to us, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts, also on YouTube. So make sure not only are you watching these episodes and listening to what we're saying, but also check the episode info for our sources. We compiled a good list of resources for you all, so I hope you're able to check those out. But until the next time we're together, take it easy. Take care of yourself.
Take care.